The fluorescent lights of TechVision's main conference room seemed especially harsh that morning. I adjusted my simple gray blazer, feeling out of place among the sea of designer suits gathering for CEO Richard Maxwell's special announcement. After 15 years as the company's lead research engineer, I should have been used to these corporate gatherings, but something felt different today. My name is Michelle Chen, and I've spent my career quietly revolutionizing the semiconductor industry, even if most people don't know it. While others chased promotions and corner offices, I focused on innovation, securing patent after patent for technologies that would shape the future of computing. But in the corporate world, being brilliant isn't always enough. Sometimes, it's about who tells the better story. Everyone, please take your seats, Richard's commanding voice cut through the murmur of conversation. At 45, he looked every bit the Silicon Valley CEO, expensive suit, perfectly coiffed hair, and a smile that had charmed countless investors. Today marks a historic moment for TechVision. I could feel the tension in the room as hundreds of employees leaned forward. Rumors of a major deal had been circulating for weeks, but no one knew the details. I sat in my usual spot near the back, laptop open to continue monitoring the automated tests running on my latest project. I'm thrilled to announce that TechVision will be merging with Global Tech Industries in a $2 billion deal. Richard's voice swelled with pride. This merger will create the largest semiconductor company in North America. The room erupted in applause. I remained still, my mind racing through the implications. Global Tech was our biggest competitor, known for aggressive business tactics and questionable research practices. More importantly, they had been trying to replicate our core technology for years without success. This merger represents everything we value at TechVision: bold vision, strategic thinking, and real innovation, Richard continued, his eyes scanning the room. Then they landed on me, and his smile took on a sharper edge. Unlike some approaches to innovation that waste company resources. He gestured toward my corner. We've all seen employees who hide in their labs, collecting patents like baseball cards instead of creating real value for shareholders. Laughter rippled through the room. I kept my face neutral even as I felt the stares of my colleagues. Richard had never forgiven me for refusing to rush an unstable version of our quantum integration process to market last year, despite his direct orders. In his world, stock prices mattered more than scientific integrity. The future belongs to those who think big, who aren't afraid to take risks, Richard declared. That's why Global Tech is the perfect partner. Their CEO, James Morrison, shares our vision for aggressive growth and market dominance. As if on cue, James Morrison strode onto the stage. Tall, silver-haired, and radiating confidence, he embodied corporate power. Thank you, Richard. I've long admired TechVision's market position, and particularly your proprietary semiconductor technology. Together, we'll control the future of computing. I closed my laptop quietly. They had no idea what they were walking into. You see, Richard's greatest weakness was his assumption that quiet people were weak people. He never bothered to read the fine print of those worthless patents he'd just mocked. Walking back to my lab after the announcement, I heard quick footsteps behind me. Michelle, wait. It was David Parker, my former research partner and now TechVision's chief technology officer. He'd been one of the few who recognized the value of my work early on. Quite an announcement, I said, keying in my lab access code. David looked uncomfortable. Listen, I tried to tell Richard he needs to review your patent portfolio before finalizing the merger, but he wouldn't listen. He thinks it's just standard company IP. I smiled slightly. That's interesting, considering I never assigned most of my patents to TechVision. David's eyes widened. What do you mean? When I joined TechVision, I negotiated a special contract. Any patents I developed using my own resources and time belonged to me personally. The company only has limited usage rights. I started organizing files on my computer. Richard never read the contract. He just assumed. But that means... David's voice trailed off as realization dawned. Yes, I said quietly. The quantum integration process that Global Tech wants so badly? The neural routing algorithms? The adaptive chip architecture? They're all my personal intellectual property. And I never agreed to transfer them to any other company. David sank into a chair. Michelle, this merger, it's largely based on accessing that technology. Global Tech's entire integration plan assumes they'll have full rights to your innovations. I know. I continued typing, pulling up documents I'd prepared months ago when I first heard merger rumors. And in 2 weeks, when the due diligence team finally reads the actual patent assignments, they'll discover that their $2 billion deal is worthless without my consent. Richard will be furious, David whispered. Richard should have read the contracts, I replied calmly. He was too busy mocking my worthless patents to notice what they actually covered. Over the next week, I watched the merger machinery grind forward. Press releases touted the perfect synergy between the companies. Richard gave interviews about consolidating industry-leading technology. Through it all, I kept working quietly in my lab, waiting for the inevitable. It happened exactly 13 days after the announcement. I was running calibration tests when my phone buzzed, an urgent message requesting my presence in the main conference room. Walking down the hallway, I could already hear raised voices. Inside, Richard was pacing like a caged lion, his perfect hair now disheveled. James Morrison sat at the table, face dark with anger. Around them, lawyers and executives shuffled through papers with increasingly panicked expressions. Ms. Chen, one of Global Tech's lawyers, addressed me. We've been reviewing the patent assignments for the core technology portfolio. There seems to be a complication. A complication? James Morrison's voice could have cut steel. The entire quantum integration framework is registered to her personally, not to TechVision. Richard spun toward me, face flushed. What kind of game are you playing? Those patents belong to this company. I pulled out my own copy of my employment contract, the one I'd negotiated 15 years ago when TechVision was desperate for top engineering talent. Actually, they don't. My contract explicitly states that any innovations developed using my own resources remain my intellectual property. TechVision has usage rights but no ownership. That's impossible, Richard sputtered. No one has contracts like that. You signed it yourself, I said softly. Though apparently you never read it carefully. Just like you never really understood the technology you've been trying to sell. Name your price, James Morrison said suddenly. Everyone has one. I turned to face him directly. My price. My price is something neither of you can afford. Respect for the innovation process. You see, I'm not interested in helping two companies merge just so they can rush untested technology to market and potentially harm consumers. You'll never work in this industry again, Richard threatened, his corporate polish finally cracking. I laughed softly. I don't work for the industry, Richard. I work for the advancement of science. And after today, I'll be doing that somewhere my work is actually valued. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. The message was from the National Science Foundation, confirming my appointment as their new Director of Quantum Computing Initiatives. I'd submitted my resignation letter to TechVision that morning, time to arrive just after this meeting. You've been planning this, Richard accused, finally understanding. No, Richard. You planned this when you decided to sell technology you didn't own. I'm just ensuring it remains in responsible hands. I stood up, smoothing my blazer. Now if you'll excuse me, I have some patents to review. Real ones, not worthless ones. Walking out of that conference room, I felt lighter than I had in years. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one you should watch most carefully. Because while others are busy talking about making history, we're busy writing it. The merger announcement was retracted the next day. TechVision's stock plunged. Richard resigned under pressure from the board. But the real story was just beginning. The news broke like a tsunami through Silicon Valley. TechVision Global Tech $2 billion merger collapses. Key patents owned by engineer, not company, screamed the headlines. Within hours, my phone was flooded with messages from journalists, tech analysts, and most interestingly, other engineers sharing similar stories of corporate exploitation. My simple apartment became my sanctuary as the storm raged. I spent the morning after the collapse calmly sipping tea and watching TechVision's stock price plummet on my laptop screen. A part of me felt sad, not for Richard or the failed merger, but for the hundreds of employees whose jobs were now uncertain. You've started quite the revolution, David said, settling into my living room chair. He'd brought bagels and coffee, a peace offering of sorts. The board is in complete chaos. Richard's resignation letter blamed everyone but himself, of course. I nodded, pulling up a document on my laptop. I expected that. That's why I prepared this. I turned the screen to show him a comprehensive business plan. A new research institute focused on ethical technology development. No rushed deadlines, no cutting corners for quarterly profits. David leaned forward, scanning the document. You're going to need funding, facilities. Already arranged, I smiled. Remember James Morrison's, "Everyone has a price," comment? He was right, just not in the way he thought. My price was independence. I showed David another document. The terms of my appointment at the National Science Foundation, which included a unique public-private partnership. My patents would be licensed for public research, with commercial applications carefully controlled to ensure ethical development. Several venture capital firms have already reached out, I continued. They see the value in long-term responsible innovation. But more importantly, I pulled up my email showing dozens of messages from engineers and researchers across the industry. We're not alone. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. While TechVision struggled to stabilize without access to my technology, I was building something new. The Chen Institute for Ethical Innovation took shape in a renovated industrial space just outside the city. Our mission was simple: advance technology while protecting humanity's interests. But corporate giants don't fall quietly. Richard, despite his resignation, wasn't finished with me yet. "Legal notice for you," my assistant said one morning, 3 months after the merger collapse. The document alleged patent infringement, claiming my innovations were actually based on earlier TechVision research. I couldn't help but laugh. Opening my drawer, I pulled out a worn leather notebook. My research journal from graduate school, every page notarized and dated. They really should have done their homework, I told my assistant. Every concept, every innovation, documented years before I joined TechVision. The lawsuit was dismissed within weeks, but it served a purpose. It showed just how desperate the old guard had become. The industry was changing and they were losing control. My phone buzzed. A message from Sarah Martinez, a former TechVision engineer who joined my institute. "Michelle, you need to see this. Richard's giving a talk at the Technology Leadership Conference." I pulled up the live stream. Richard, looking somewhat less polished than his CEO days, was in full attack mode. "These ethical innovation advocates are destroying American competitiveness," he declared. "We need to move fast, break things." Speaking of breaking things, I typed back to Sarah, "How's the quantum stability testing going?" "Perfect," she replied. "Your original process works exactly as documented. Global Tech's rushed version would have failed catastrophically within months." That validation meant everything. While Richard was busy defending his failed leadership, we were proving that careful, ethical innovation could succeed. The Chen Institute's first patents were already being licensed to responsible manufacturers. 6 months after the merger collapse, I stood on a different stage addressing a packed auditorium at MIT. "Innovation isn't just about being first to market," I told the eager young faces. "It's about being right. About creating technology that serves humanity, not just shareholders." The response was overwhelming. Applications to our research programs flooded in. More importantly, other companies began adopting our ethical development framework. The industry was evolving. 1 year to the day after Richard's merger announcement, I received an unexpected visitor. James Morrison, no longer with Global Tech, stood in my office looking humbled. "I was wrong," he said simply. "Not just about the merger but about the whole approach to innovation. Your institute's results this year." He shook his head. "We could never have achieved that with our rush-to-market strategy." I offered him a seat. "The technology was never the real issue, James. It was the philosophy behind it. When you prioritize short-term gains over long-term responsibility, you end up with neither." He nodded slowly. "That's why I'm here. My new venture capital firm wants to invest in responsible innovation. No pressure for quick exits, no rushing to market. Would you consider being on our advisory board?" I studied him for a moment. "On one condition, we establish a fund for independent researchers. Help others protect their innovations like I protected mine." The agreement we reached that day would change the industry's funding landscape forever. The Independent Innovation Protection Fund became a lifeline for researchers fighting corporate pressure to compromise their work. Richard? He tried to make a comeback with a new startup, but investors had learned their lesson. Last I heard, he was writing a book about disruptive leadership. though I doubt it mentions how his own leadership was disrupted. TechVision survived, though changed. The board appointed David as CEO, and he implemented a comprehensive ethical innovation policy. My patents are still licensed to them, but now under strict quality control conditions. The Chen Institute continues to grow. We've expanded into 3 new research fields, and our ethical development framework has become an industry standard. More importantly, we've created a community where brilliant minds can work without compromising their principles. Sometimes at night I still work late in my lab just like I did at TechVision. But now when I look through the glass walls, I see others doing the same, researchers free to pursue innovation at its own pace, without fear of corporate pressure. On my desk sits a framed copy of that special contract I negotiated 15 years ago. Next to it is a photo from our institute's opening day, showing a diverse team of scientists and engineers, many of whom left prestigious corporate jobs to join our mission. Last week, a young engineer asked me if I regret not selling my patents for what would surely have been hundreds of millions. I showed her our latest project, a breakthrough in sustainable computing that could reduce global data center energy consumption by 60%. Some things, I told her, are worth more than money. The real value of innovation isn't in the patents or the profits. It's in the positive change we create. As I write this from my office overlooking our expanding campus, I think about that day in the TechVision conference room, when Richard mocked my worthless patents. He never understood that true worth isn't measured in stock prices or merger deals. It's measured in impact, in lives improved, in problems solved. The revolution I started wasn't just about patents or corporate power. It was about proving that quiet determination can overcome loud arrogance, that ethical innovation can outperform reckless ambition. Most importantly, it was about showing that sometimes the most powerful response to mockery isn't revenge. It's rising above it to create something better. Today, when people hear the name Michelle Chen, they don't think of the quiet engineer who brought down a $2 billion merger. They think of the woman who helped transform an industry's approach to innovation. And that, more than any patent or payback, is the legacy I'm proud to leave. The next generation of innovators will face their own Richard Maxwells, their own pressure to compromise. But now they have a choice, a path to protect their integrity and their innovations. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating your opponents, but from making their victory impossible by changing the rules of the game entirely. And that's a patent worth protecting.